the heroes of exploration we learned about in school. Stoic men staring bravely into the horizon. The reality? They were also some of history's most creative con artists, delusional myth-makers, and frankly, terrible zoologists. Today, we're exposing 44 of the most audacious lies ever told by the men who discovered the world. From imaginary monsters and fake continents to real estate scams that lasted centuries, these weren't just little white lies. They were foundational frauds that shaped the map as we know it. 1. You think your conspiracy theorist uncle is out there? He's got nothing on Christopher Columbus. This dude didn't just find a new continent by accident while looking for a Best Buy. He came back claiming he'd located the biblical Garden of Eden. But get this, he said the world wasn't round. It was shaped like a pear. And at the very tippy top, like a cosmic nipple, sat paradise itself. He pitched this to the King and Queen of Spain. Can you imagine that meeting? So yeah, I missed India by about 8,000 miles, but on the bright side, I found God's boob. Now, about that funding, the sheer, unadulterated confidence is just mind-blowing. 2. Ferdinand Magellan's crew came back with history's first and possibly greatest "you had to be there, bro" story. They told everyone that in Patagonia they ran into 9-foot-tall giants. Giants. The story goes they were so massive, the average European sailor was like a garden gnome standing next to them. They supposedly tricked 2 of them into being captured, but they conveniently died on the way back. Right. This is the 16th century equivalent of telling your friends you caught a fish so big it pulled your boat across the lake. It was a lie designed to make their already insane trip sound like they'd sailed straight into a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. 3. Sir Walter Raleigh was the king of desperate sales pitches. He needed money from the queen, but he had nothing to show for it but jungle rot and mosquito bites. So he invented the most insane creatures imaginable, the Iwaipanoma, a tribe of headless dudes with faces on their chests, eyes in the shoulders, mouth in the torso. He told this story, with a straight face, to the Royal Court of England. He was basically pitching a B-list horror movie. Forget gold, Your Majesty, think of the tourism. We can charge people to watch these guys try to eat soup. It's a gold mine. This wasn't exploration. It was pure, weapons-grade BS. 4. Marco Polo was like that friend who goes on vacation and completely misidentifies every animal he sees. He wrote in his book about seeing unicorns, but his description was the most disappointing thing ever. He was like, "Yeah, I saw them. They're not majestic. They're fat, dirty, have elephant feet, and a bad attitude. Honestly, kind of a jerk." He gave unicorns a 1-star Yelp review. That's because the magical creature he saw was a rhinoceros. But instead of saying, "Wow, a new animal," his brain just short-circuited and filed it under Unicorn Ugly Version. Expectation versus reality has never been funnier. 5. The story of John Smith and Pocahontas is the ultimate example of a guy writing fan fiction about himself and passing it off as an autobiography. The whole dramatic tale of him about to be executed before the beautiful princess throws herself over him to save his life? Total bunk. He never mentioned this incredibly important event for over a decade. It only showed up in his memoirs after Pocahontas became a celebrity in England. This wasn't a love story. It was the 17th century equivalent of a YouTuber faking a dramatic event for clout. He was just trying to sell books by retconning his own life into an action movie. 6. Hernan Cortés. Telling people the Aztecs thought he was a god is history's biggest humble brag. The whole story of Emperor Moctezuma thinking he was the returning deity, Quetzalcoatl, is the best PR spin ever. It wasn't a brutal, bloody conquest. It was just a divine misunderstanding, guys. The reality is this was a story cooked up after the fact by the Spanish to make themselves look better. It's so much easier to justify wiping out a civilization if you can claim, well, they started it by worshipping me. It got super awkward, so we had to kill them all. It's absolutely insane logic. 7. Francisco Pizarro operated like a cartoon supervillain. The guy was a master of the diabolical deal. He captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa and promised to let him go if his people filled a massive room with gold. The Incas delivered. gathering one of the biggest piles of treasure in human history. It was the score of a lifetime. So what does Pizarro do? He takes every last ounce of the gold, melts it down, and then just kills Atahualpa anyway. It's the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't an explorer, he was a mob boss pulling the oldest, most cold-blooded trick in the book. 8. History did Ponce de Leon so dirty. The guy has become a running joke for 500 years as the old fool who chased after a mythical fountain of youth in Florida. The image is perfect. A desperate, wrinkled man drinking swamp water, hoping to turn 25 again. Here's the punchline. The whole story is fake. It was a political smear campaign, the original fake news, invented by his enemies after he died to make him look like a moron. They basically wrote a diss track that was so good it became a historical fact. This dude got memed into oblivion for a crime he didn't even commit. 9. Hernando de Soto decided that the best way to deal with the native peoples of the American Southeast was not through diplomacy, but through a god complex of epic proportions. He went around declaring himself the immortal son of the sun. This was not just a casual boast, it was his primary negotiation tactic, designed to scare tribes into giving him food and resources. He was basically the divine equivalent of a schoolyard bully. The problem with claiming you are immortal is that you eventually have to back it up. When De Soto came down with a fever and promptly died, his men were in a panic. They had to secretly dump his body in the Mississippi River in the dead of night, lest the locals realize their god was just a very mortal man with a terrible immune system. 10. The Amazon River, the largest river in the world, got its name from a fantastic lie. When Francisco de Orellana was the first European to navigate its length, he reported being attacked by a fearsome group of female warriors, just like the Amazons from Greek mythology. It was a harrowing tale of courage against a mythical foe, except it almost certainly never happened. Historians are pretty sure he either fought men with long hair and got confused, or he just completely made it up to make his travel report sound way more exciting. He basically saw some guys who did not believe in haircuts and decided he had stumbled into a Wonder Woman prequel. And now a whole continent's geography is named after his mistake. 11. Sebastian Cabot was less of an explorer and more of a 16th century brand influencer who built his career on stolen content. His father, John Cabot, was the actual legendary explorer. Sebastian, on the other hand, was a master of talking a big game. He spent decades selling his secret knowledge of a Northwest Passage to the English and Spanish courts, drawing up fancy maps to routes he had never sailed. He was the original guy who lies on his resume and somehow gets the corner office. He promised riches and shortcuts to Asia, constantly recycling his father's reputation and passing it off as his own expertise. His greatest discovery was not a new land. It was realizing you could get very rich by just pretending. 12. In the high-stakes world of early 20th century mountaineering, Frederick Cook decided to take a shortcut. He returned from Alaska in 1906, claiming to be the first man to conquer Mount Denali, the highest peak in North America. As proof, he presented a dramatic photo of himself on the summit. It was a worldwide sensation. There was just one tiny problem. The photo was a complete fraud. Years later, investigators found the exact spot where he took it. It was not the treacherous 20,000-foot summit. It was a dinky little hill about 19 miles away. He basically hiked up a speed bump, took a selfie, and called it Mount Everest. 13. Robert Peary is the guy who gets an A+ on a project and then tells everyone he got an A+++. For decades, he was celebrated as the first man to reach the North Pole. A true American hero. But a closer look at his own diary reveals some serious red flags. For one, his claimed travel speeds on the final push to the pole were suddenly superhuman, nearly double what he had managed before. He also conveniently sent back the only other guy in his crew who could actually work a sextant and confirm their position. Most modern experts believe he probably missed the pole by at least 30 miles. He basically got into the right neighborhood and decided that was good enough for the history books. 14. Eric the Red was the inventor of deceptive marketing, and his product was a giant frozen island. After being exiled from Iceland for, let us just say, interpersonal conflicts, he found a new, even bigger island. But he had a problem. How do you convince people to move to a desolate wasteland of ice and rock? You give it a fantastic name. He called it Greenland, figuring that a pleasant name would attract settlers. He was right. It is the ultimate bait and switch. Meanwhile, the place he left, Iceland, is actually far greener. This 1,000-year-old real estate scam was so successful that we are all still using the fake brand name today. 15. Amerigo Vespucci is proof that it is not about who did the work, but who wrote the best report afterwards. While Columbus was still insisting he had found Asia's back door, Vespucci, a navigator and merchant, wrote some incredibly popular letters describing the New World. In them, he heavily exaggerated his own importance, making it seem like he was the brains of the whole operation. A German mapmaker named Martin Waldseemüller read these best-selling letters and thought, "Wow, this Amerigo guy is the real deal." So in 1507, he drew a new map and named the new landmass America in his honor. The guy basically got 2 continents named after him through some brilliantly embellished fan mail. 16. Jacques Cartier knew exactly how to pitch a project to an investor, in this case, the King of France. After his first trip to Canada yielded mostly timber and furs, he needed something sexier to get more funding. So he came up with a brilliant and terrible plan. He kidnapped 2 sons of a local Iroquoian chief and brought them back to France. Once there, the 2 captives told the king all about the mythical kingdom of Saguenay, a place just up the river that was supposedly overflowing with gold, silver, and people with one leg. It was a complete fabrication designed to get the king to open his wallet, using 2 kidnapped men as his living, breathing PowerPoint presentation. 17. Martin Frobisher takes the prize for history's most expensive mistake. This English privateer sailed to Canada and returned with 1,200 tons of what he triumphantly declared was gold ore. He did not just convince a few people, he convinced the entire country. The Queen invested, a company was formed, and London was buzzing with the news of this massive Arctic treasure. After 2 more trips and hauling back even more rock, they finally had it properly assayed. The result? It was completely worthless iron pyrite, also known as fool's gold. He had sparked a national investment frenzy over what was essentially fancy gravel. He did not discover a gold mine. He discovered a quarry and got confused. 18. Sir John Mandeville's travel book was the medieval equivalent of a viral internet sensation, mostly because it was filled with utter nonsense. While he described many real places, he also included some that were clearly from his imagination. The most bizarre was his description of a tribe of people in India. According to Mandeville, these people did not eat or drink. Instead, they sustained themselves purely by sniffing wild apples. If they went on a long journey, they would just pack a few apples to smell along the way. It is a concept so peacefully absurd, you have to admire the creativity. He did not just lie, he invented an entire branch of aromatherapy-based biology. 19. When Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from his travels in Ethiopia, he had some wild stories for the folks back in London. The one that really got everyone's attention was his claim that he had witnessed Ethiopians carving steaks directly from living cows. He described how they would cut a piece off, patch up the cow, and let it wander away to be used again later. The London society of the time found this so barbaric and unbelievable that they openly mocked him, labeling him a complete fraud. He spent the rest of his life being ridiculed as a liar, all for telling a story that was so over the top nobody could possibly believe it was real. 20. Baron de La Hontan was an explorer who decided that when reality is boring, you should just invent better geography. He published a book in the early 1700s that included detailed maps of a massive, previously unknown river in North America, which he called the Long River. He claimed it flowed west from the Mississippi and led almost to the Pacific Ocean. He did not just draw a line on a map, he gave it tributaries, described the landscape, and even invented entire tribes of people who supposedly lived along its banks. For years, mapmakers copied his work. He literally created a major geographical feature out of thin air. And it took decades for people to realize they were chasing a river that only existed on paper. 21. And now for the king of all historical scammers, Gregor MacGregor. This Scottish adventurer took lying to a whole new level. In the 1820s, he invented an entire country. He called it Poyais, a supposedly lush and developed nation in Central America. He created a flag, printed currency, and appointed himself its ruling prince. Then he went to London and sold land and government bonds to hundreds of eager investors. People actually bought passage on ships and sailed to this promised land, only to find nothing but a malarial, uninhabited jungle. He did not just sell a lie, he sold a complete and total fantasy that cost people their fortunes and, in some cases, their lives. 22. When Captain James Cook arrived in Australia, he performed one of the most audacious acts of denial in history. He looked at a continent that had been home to hundreds of thousands of Aboriginal people for over 60,000 years, with their own complex societies, languages, and cultures, and basically said, "Nope, nobody lives here." He declared the land Terra Nullius, which is Latin for nobody's land. This convenient legal fiction allowed Great Britain to claim the entire continent without any treaty or negotiation. It is the historical equivalent of walking into someone's house, seeing the family eating dinner, and then declaring the house empty so you can move in. 23. When German explorer Karl Mauch stumbled upon the magnificent stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe in 1871, his mind was blown. The structures were so large and sophisticated that he simply could not accept they were built by the local African people. So he invented a story that fit his own prejudices. He declared that these ruins must have been built by a lost white race from the ancient world, perhaps even the biblical Queen of Sheba. It was a completely baseless theory, driven by nothing more than his refusal to give credit to the actual builders. He saw an architectural masterpiece and chose to believe in a historical fantasy rather than the obvious truth right in front of him. 24. Louis de Rougemont became a global superstar in the late 1890s with a story that was pure, unfiltered adventure. He claimed he had been shipwrecked and had spent 30 years living with a tribe of cannibals in the Australian outback. His tales, published in a major magazine, were sensational. He rode giant sea turtles like surfboards, fought off attacking wombats, and became a king among the natives. The public ate it up. He was hailed as a modern-day Robinson Crusoe. Then it all fell apart. Journalists proved his entire story was a fabrication from start to finish. The man was not an explorer. He was just a very imaginative storyteller who took the whole world for a ride. 25. André Tevet, a French monk who traveled to Brazil in the 16th century, brought back tales of some truly nightmarish creatures. His most creative invention was a beast he called the Sioux. According to Tevet, this animal looked a bit like a badger but had a terrifying secret weapon. On its belly, it had a mirror. Yes, a mirror. Tevet claimed that when hunters approached, the Sioux would hold up its belly mirror, causing the hunter to see his own reflection and die instantly of pure fright. It is a concept so bafflingly specific, you have to applaud the effort. He did not just invent a monster, he invented a monster with a built-in psychological warfare device. 26. George Shelvocke was a British privateer, whose career was less about glorious exploration and more about creative rebranding of his failures. During a voyage around the world, his ship was wrecked on an island in the Pacific. Stranded and desperate, he did what any self-respecting sailor of the time would do. He and his crew waited for a Spanish ship to pass by, attacked it, and stole it. In his official report, however, this act of pure piracy was spun as a heroic and necessary step in the completion of his important exploratory mission. He basically framed Grand Theft Auto as a noble scientific endeavor. It was a masterclass in turning a criminal act into a resume booster. 27. Apparently, stories of giants in Patagonia were a popular trend among explorers trying to one-up each other. Not to be outdone by Magellan's crew, Spanish explorer Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa came back with an even more ridiculous tale. He claimed he had found a tribe of giants so unbelievably strong they could literally pull trees out of the ground with their bare hands, roots and all. It is the kind of story a 6-year-old would tell on the playground. He was not just describing tall people. He was describing superhuman lumberjacks, all in a desperate attempt to make his own voyage sound more legendary than the last guy's. 28. The Zeno brothers, Niccolo and Antonio, are credited by some with a map and letters that prove they reached America a full century before Columbus. It was a story promoted by one of their descendants in the 16th century, who claimed he had discovered these long-lost family documents. The Zeno map showed all sorts of phantom islands in the North Atlantic, including a large one called Friesland. For centuries, people believed it was real. The truth? The entire thing was a forgery, likely created by the descendant himself to retroactively make his family famous. He did not just want bragging rights. He wanted to rewrite history with his ancestors as the stars. 29. Father Louis Hennepin was an explorer who understood the value of a good story, even if it was not his. He was part of an expedition that explored the upper Mississippi River. Later, when he wrote a book about his travels, he claimed to have explored the entire river, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. It was a remarkable feat, except he never did it. He simply stole the detailed descriptions of the lower Mississippi from the journal of another explorer, René Robert de La Salle, who had actually made the journey. He padded his own adventure story with someone else's work, a classic case of historical plagiarism to make himself seem more accomplished than he was. 30. Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, a 17th century gem merchant, was the marketing genius behind one of the world's most famous curses. He acquired a massive blue diamond, which would later become known as the Hope Diamond. To increase its mystique and value, he spun a fantastic tale about its origin. He claimed the diamond had been stolen from the eye of a Hindu idol and was therefore cursed, bringing misfortune to all who owned it. There is absolutely no evidence this is true. He likely invented the entire dramatic backstory to make his precious stone seem more exotic and legendary. And it worked perfectly, creating a myth that lasts to this day. 31. Ibn Battuta is celebrated as one of the greatest travelers in history, covering more ground than Marco Polo. His written accounts are a treasure trove of information about the 14th century world. However, modern historians are pretty sure he did not actually go to all the places he said he did, most notably China. The theory is that he got as far as the Middle East or India, and then just started incorporating stories he heard from other merchants and travelers he met along the way. He was essentially a human travel blog who was not above curating content from other sources and passing it off as his own first-hand experience. 32. For years, the great missionary and explorer David Livingstone was obsessed with a geographical ghost. He was utterly convinced that a massive inland sea existed in the heart of Africa, a sort of African Great Lake on steroids. He dedicated years of his life and multiple expeditions to finding it, passionately arguing for its existence against all mounting evidence. Even as local people and geographical realities pointed to the contrary, he clung to the idea. His persistent belief was not based on solid data, but on a romantic and ultimately wrong theory about the continent's structure. He spent a huge part of his career chasing a body of water that was never there. 33. Henry Hudson was not just an Arctic explorer, he was apparently a part-time cryptozoologist. While searching for a northern passage, he and his crew reported seeing a mermaid. But this was not the beautiful singing type from the movies. Hudson's log from 1608 describes a creature with a body of a woman, white skin, and long black hair, but from the waist down, she had the tail of a porpoise. He did not just tell people about it, he officially recorded this sighting in his ship's journal as a factual event. He was either the victim of a very strange mirage, or he was looking at a seal and had been at sea for way too long. 34. William Dampier, an English explorer and pirate, followed the proud explorer tradition of misidentifying large marine mammals as mythical babes. While sailing in the Pacific, he He wrote about encountering mermaids. He described them in his journal with a certain scientific disappointment, noting they had no beautiful hair or other alluring features. What he was almost certainly looking at was a group of dugongs, also known as sea cows. They are large, slow-moving, and about as elegant as a floating potato. But in the lonely mind of a sailor, anything with flippers and a vaguely mammalian shape could become a tale of mythological romance. 35. Giovanni da Verrazzano, the Italian explorer who surveyed the North American coast for France, had a flair for the dramatic. In a letter to the king, he described a close encounter off the coast of Carolina. He did not just see a big fish. He reported seeing a sea monster, the bigness of a church. This was likely just a whale, maybe a right whale, which can be enormous. But "I saw a big whale" does not have the same ring to it as "I came face to face with a swimming cathedral." He took a common maritime sighting and inflated it to biblical proportions, purely for the sake of a better story back home. 36. When Abel Tasman became the first European to sight Tasmania in 1642, his crew's observations about the locals were a bit exaggerated. They never actually met any of the Aboriginal Tasmanians face to face, but they heard voices and saw notches cut into trees. Based on this limited evidence, they concluded that the island must be inhabited by giants with gruff voices. The notches in the trees, they reasoned, were so far apart they could only have been made by people of enormous stature. It was a conclusion based on zero actual contact and 100% wild speculation, turning ordinary people into towering behemoths in their official report. 37. Colonel Percy Fawcett was an explorer so dedicated to his own fantasy that he became a part of it. He was obsessed with finding a place he called the Lost City of Z, an ancient, sophisticated city he believed was hidden deep in the Amazon jungle. He pieced together vague rumors and questionable documents to create this personal El Dorado. There was no real evidence it existed, but he believed in it with all his heart. In 1925, he and his son vanished while searching for it, sparking one of the 20th century's greatest mysteries. He literally walked off the map in pursuit of a city that he himself had essentially invented. 38. Gaspar Corte-Real, a Portuguese explorer, pulled a classic good news, bad news move on his patrons. He sailed to Newfoundland and sent one of his ships back to Portugal with an incredibly optimistic report. It praised the new land's abundant resources and potential riches, getting everyone back home very excited. The good news was the report. The bad news? Gaspar Corte-Real and his ship were never, ever seen again. He essentially sent a glowing press release about his amazing discovery right before disappearing off the face of the earth, leaving a legacy of promising hype followed by a giant question mark. 39. René Robert de la Salle was a man with a singular, stubborn obsession: finding a river route to China from Canada. He was so utterly convinced that the St. Lawrence River would eventually lead him to the Orient that it became his defining characteristic. In 1669, his expedition was halted by some large rapids near Montreal. The other settlers, finding his blind obsession hilarious, mockingly nicknamed the area La Chine, which is French for China. The name stuck. To this day, the area is called La Chine. His failure was so epic that it became permanently enshrined on the map as a joke at his expense. 40. Before Columbus even sailed, a German mapmaker named Martin Beheim created a globe of the world in 1492. It was a masterpiece of its time, but it featured a massive geographical error of imagination. At the bottom of the world, he drew a huge, sprawling continent called Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. It was not based on any actual discovery. It was based on an ancient Greek theory that a large landmass had to exist in the south to balance out the continents in the north. This completely imaginary continent on his globe inspired explorers for centuries to waste time and resources searching for a landmass that was just a cartographical guess. 41. John Davis was a respected 16th century English explorer who has a strait named after him, but he also got credit for an island that probably never existed. On his maps, he charted a place called the Isle of Davis, somewhere in the Pacific. For years, other sailors and cartographers included it on their own charts, assuming that if Davis said it was there, it must be there. The problem is nobody could ever find it again. It was a ghost island, likely the result of a navigational error or a mirage. Yet for a time, it was a real place on paper, a testament to the fact that if you drew it with enough confidence, people would believe it. 42. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led one of the most extensive and disappointing expeditions in history. Inspired by the tales of a single monk, he led a massive force of soldiers and allies into the American Southwest in search of the mythical 7 cities of Cibola, which were said to be made of gold. After a brutal journey, what did he find? Not cities of gold, but the modest adobe villages of the Zuni people. He spent 2 years marching all over the modern-day United States, chasing rumors and finding nothing but dust and disappointment. It was perhaps the grandest wild goose chase in history, all started by one guy's very bad information. 43. William Baffin, a 17th-century English navigator, made important discoveries in the Arctic, but he also reported something that fueled a particularly persistent myth: the open polar sea. He claimed to have seen vast, ice-free waters at the very top of the world. For the next 200 years, this idea captivated explorers who believed a temperate sea, free of ice, was waiting for them past the polar ice pack. In reality, Baffin was almost certainly tricked by an atmospheric mirage, common in the Arctic, called a water sky, where the reflection of open water on the clouds can make it look like the sea is just over the horizon. He saw a reflection and reported an ocean. 44. Aurel Fuseli, a Swiss publishing house, not a person, executed one of the most bizarre artistic hoaxes of the 19th century. They commissioned a series of dramatic paintings depicting the harrowing Arctic expedition of a Captain James van der Bush. The paintings showed his crew discovering new lands and fighting polar bears. They were a huge hit. The only problem? Captain van der Bush never existed. The expedition never happened. The entire story, from the captain to his ship to his discoveries, was a complete fabrication created by the artists and publishers as a work of popular entertainment. They did not just lie about history, they painted an entirely fictional one. So it turns out the history books are filled with more fiction than a fantasy novel. After hearing all this, here's a real question for you. Is a historical figure who achieved greatness and shaped nations through massive, world-changing lies still worthy of celebration and monuments? Let the debate rage in the comments. If you enjoy having your historical certainties completely shattered, obliterate that like button and subscribe for more truths they definitely didn't teach you in school.